my name is Vikki, and what brought me initially into rooms of recovery would be I had a loved one who I felt had a problem. Then I proceeded on a little further into delving into codependency, and then I started a search for emotional sobriety. So, whatever brought you here, perhaps you are looking for a solution, perhaps you are looking for help. And I'm here to tell you that help is available. But from my experience, it starts with you. So if you're anything like me, where it was an outside piece that you felt needed to be solved, um, what I discovered is it started with me, and that is actually really, really hopeful because there's there's actually something you can do about it then. If if I really need to solve someone else's problems, that's pretty much impossible. So this group is here to support each other. We do that by sharing our experience, strength, and hope, and by being willing to share our stories each week. I'm kind of saying a little bit of this for the benefit of those who might find this on YouTube or in the podcast. Just wanted to sort of introduce what this is about. And yeah, so by being willing each week to share our stories and how recovery, specifically recovery, a recovery process that leads us to a personal relationship with God. And that's really the only solution. And it really is a solution that I've found. And that's the message that I am able to pass on. So, I would encourage you in this moment to think about the birds in the sky. Here where we live, the weather has gotten really nice. We've had a couple really hot days. The grass starts to get greener and the trees start to bloom again. And the geese come back. They return from wherever they went. And then when I think about babies and I think about puppies, I just cannot help but believe that there is a creator who created all of this beauty. I love to go and stand on a mountain range. It's not a thing that I do very often, but it's happened. Usually traveling up by car is my preferred way, but or gondola is great too. But to stand at the top of a mountain and look out over the expanse that's in front of me, I just can't help believing that there's something. And so, if that's you, if you aren't sure about this idea of God as a higher power, or even just this idea of recovery and God, um, I wanted to tell you that also God created you uh, as a reflection of God. It says in Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And Genesis 5:2 tells us he created them man and female, male and female, and he blessed them and he called them human. And he said it was good. He said that all of his creation was good. And he says that about you too. Um, he loves you. You are loved, whether you know it or not, whether you know God or not, you are loved. And actually, your suffering is actually God's suffering. He actually can understand and appreciate your suffering. In Psalm 34, there's a verse that says, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those with a contrite spirit." And contrite spirit isn't a word or a phrase that I was ever really familiar with. Uh, and so contrite, I meant to look up the definition. I didn't, but my basic understanding is that it basically would mean something like, I'm getting kind of down on my knees. Maybe I'm a little bit desperate. A contrite spirit is a spirit that isn't strong and like pushing my way through anymore. But we can all look up that word on our little mini computers and have the full definition. But my point basically is being that when I start to realize that things are a little bit out of control, or maybe things aren't really how I would, this is not the best way of living. I'm feeling unmanageability in my life in whatever area. there is a solution. There is action that I can take. Um, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous takes this action and puts it in a recipe that anyone can follow. And it's really rejected by a lot of people due to what we would call contempt prior to investigation. And sometimes that contempt is really a little bit well deserved. Maybe we had some really traumatic past experiences with religion. And I'm not going to talk, I am not talking right now about religion, a personal relationship with a higher power, with a God who actually knows you and loves you is a very different thing than religion. And so I would just encourage you, if you've come across this recording somewhere, it is worth investigating, and it is worth setting aside your pride if you're anything like me, and your judgments if you're anything like me. It is work. When I want to take a way that I was and turn to be a different way, it is quite a lot of work, but it really is worth it. And if you have a pen and paper, I have a few questions that you can pose for yourself to kind of unpack that. And the word that I used earlier was unmanageability in your life. And so, what issue has been troubling or nagging at you most lately? Or what is that thing that you just can't get over? The thing that you say you're never going to do again, but you keep wind up doing it. Who or what are you most worried about? Is there someone in your life who you feel is causing you misery? Or another way to put that is that maybe they interfere with your plans, your ideas, or your peace and serenity. Have you ever said or felt, if only this person would, I would be happy? If only, the if onlys. So those are just a few prompt questions to help you maybe think about or explore what is creating unmanageability in your life. There is, and so, I would say I can identify, and maybe I'm meant to add a little bit in there. So I can identify with the if onlys, and most specifically with the if only this person would blank, 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 then I would be happy. And that creates so much unmanageability in my life because it takes me on a cycle of I try to fix and control. I get frustrated. I throw up my hands. I'll maybe have a little outburst at some point. I might have a little outburst of anger, which often feels really great. Can anybody identify with that when you finally have that little blow up? I'm sorry. That it just feels so good. And it's really honestly brings me to this like selfish self-pity pot of just this swirl of where I get to feel sorry for myself again, which it took me a long time to admit was a really comfortable, happy place for me to live in that self-pity pit. It took me a very long time to recognize how much I was playing a victim in my own life, at the mercy of the world around me, and people around me, the world around me, the job not being the way that I wanted it to be, the weather not being the way that I would want it to be, lots of different things going on, and the amount of control and fear that I had going on in my life was absolutely exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. And initially, I thought I'm writing a talk. I was writing a talk about rest. That's what I had titled this talk. And I was writing about rest. And then I was like, wow, this doesn't feel very restful at all as I talk about all of this. So let's call it action. Um, but, my goal, it's really become like this idea in my head, or maybe it's a promise that I held onto, a promise from the Bible, a promise from the big book, but that I could live joyous, happy, and free. I heard it in the early years of going to an Al Anon meeting, um, that I could actually live happy, joyous, and free, regardless of what other people were doing, was a promise that I was so drawn to. Um, what maybe I didn't realize at the beginning is actually it began that promise begins to come true by me admitting and accepting the truth about myself and the relationships that I have, um, because I really can't recover from what I can't see. So I needed to really see some truths, and that's what this work, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I worked not as an alcoholic, but as a codependent, or what I later started to refer to as a chaos creator, because I was trying to really nail down, what am I looking for here? There's something so tangible about, being alcoholic. You can really hold on to that. And you had your last drink, or you had your first drink, or you've taken whatever your substance of choice is if you're an addict. And you actually have this like really fine, determined, um, clearly determined like start and stop. It's very difficult for me, as a codependent or as a chaos creator, to really see the clear start and stop of my unmanageability. It creeps in quite, um, sneakily and elusively, and it's very obvious to people around me far, far sooner than it's obvious to me. So the promises are, there's so many promises in the big book. It's this intimidating book, but actually it's only 164 pages, and there's so many promises in the pages of that book. And I want to just give some of them to you today, later on. But really, the first promise is that there's freedom available to you, regardless of what other people are doing. There's freedom available to you, regardless of what you've been doing in the past. There's freedom available to you, and there's rest available to you. We come into rooms like this, or onto recordings like this, or podcasts like this. If you found this, you probably arrived here tired, frustrated, anxious, lonely, depressed, angry. Truthfully, there is a solution, and the rest is available to you. I can't recover, from what I don't see. And for me, I needed to see where I was a victim and where I desperately tried to control. I was very reactive, and that cycle, of trying to control, letting other people control me, being the victim, being full of anxiety, fear, and confusion. It was truly just a vicious cycle that I went on. I can see I can see it in today's life, but when I look at, my old life, like, over 10 years ago, before I started into recovery, the distinction is a lot more drastic. But I can still see it today when it's happening, or I don't see it right away when it's happening. Um, Through recovery rooms, and and spiritual principles, and learning to live a spiritual life, I learned how to let other people go about their own business and their own lives without trying to set them straight. I always felt like it was my job. And I come by that honestly. I have three younger brothers that are significantly younger than me. I took on a lot of responsibility at a very young age. I was overly responsible. I feel like I was probably just born overly responsible. I don't know. Was that nature, nurture? I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but boy, am I really good at taking on more responsibility than what's mine. And I really needed to put a focus on me through this program, get my eyes off of other people, and learn how to start taking care of myself. That's how I took steps to freedom. And I can say honestly, today I've experienced so much healing through this work. So I wanted to read to you from, and okay, so then I had another line actually that I wanted that came to me this morning as I was praying. Um, and this is just an idea. I'm not even going to be able to word it properly. This is a promise. It's not in the big book, but this is a promise that came to me as I was praying this morning, that God is so big and so powerful that I can be full of God. I can breathe in God's spirit. I will be full of God's spirit, but I cannot contain it. I can't contain God's spirit. And so that means that the fullness of the work that I do, my action isn't actually the fullness of what's going to determine what happens in my healing and in my spirit and in my growth. Because I can't contain it. So that means if I don't do things that I should be doing, or if I'm not doing this perfectly, or if I screwed up over here, it actually really doesn't truly matter. God can do things anyway. God can do it no matter what. I can't contain God's spirit. So from page 82 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is a paragraph at the bottom of the page. The alcoholic, the chaos creator, the controller fixer, the person who is living an unmanageable life is like a tornado roaring their way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came up out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined, and to his wife he remarked, "Don't see nothing the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" And so that paragraph is really telling us it's not enough to stop drinking. It's not enough to stop whatever the unmanageable thing is in my life. It's not enough to just leave the boyfriend that was terrible to me because he was such a problem. It's not enough. It's not enough. It wasn't enough for me, for my husband to get sober. I need to look around and realize like my selfish and inconsiderate habits and ways of being kept my life in turmoil, kept my home in turmoil. And it is thoughtless to say that emotional sobriety is enough. I needed to continue to do the work and I needed to make amends. And amends being not just going and saying sorry, but making right wrongs that I had done. The promise being that when I live this, and when I do all of this action, there's a whole bunch of things that are going to come true in my life. One of them being that I am not going to waste futile energy anymore. I've wasted so much futile energy. And so when I think about how exhausted I was, how depleted I can be, I really truly realized like, oh, wow, okay, Now I can live this new life. So I begin to really see this coming true when I get towards the end of working. If I'm going to, really apply myself to the 12 steps, as I get to the end, I see that I can be intentional about each day. And I can actually start this sooner. So even if you haven't actually worked the 12 steps, even if you're not really sure about them, you can start by constructively reviewing your day when you retire at night and asking, was I resentful? Was I selfish? Was I dishonest or afraid? Do I owe an apology? Have I kept something to myself that should be discussed with another person at once? Was I kind and loving towards all? What could I have done better? And it's hard to do this constructively if I'm still in turmoil. But it is, I believe, helpful to get a glimpse of what can be possible. And so I actually started reading this every day when I was still in turmoil. And I wasn't able to do it really well, but I was able to actually see, oh, this is going to be really good. I'm going to read, and sorry, now I'm reading from page 86. And so this is in the chapter called Into Action. And so this promise is telling me that there's going to be a whole new way of living that's going to become opened up to me. So on awakening, I can start to think about the 24 hours ahead, consider my plans for the day. Before I begin, I ask God to direct my thinking, especially that my thinking would be free from self-pity, dishonesty, and self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, I can employ my mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave me a brain to use. My thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when my thinking is cleared of wrong motives. That's a promise. In thinking about my day, I might face indecision. I might not be able to determine which course of action is best to take. Here, I can ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision, and I relax and take it easy. I don't struggle. I will be often surprised at how the right answers will come after I have tried this for a while. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that I'm going to be inspired at all times. I might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. That's okay. It's okay if I make mistakes. I will find that my thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration, and I will come to rely upon it.